Q&A. So, um, yeah, there we go. Hi, Terra. Can you
Hi,
hear me?
I can hear you. Is that
Yeah?
JJ?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Ooh, that reverb.
Yeah. Thank you. We just finished watching your film.
Ah, thank you.
Um,
Thank you for coming, everyone.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you for being here as well. Um, I wanted to open up this conversation by asking you, last time we spoke, which was a few years ago, I remember that we spoke about this very long-term process, which was making this film, which I think began even before. Like I've heard people describe how this film was like a 5-year process, but I think that that might be a how do you say, a minimization of maybe a longer process. So I guess it's a complicated question, but the origination and then also the consistency of keeping a project such as this one happening. Maybe if we can elaborate on that a little bit, and to kickstart this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's true. I mean, typically we frame the making of the film as a 5-year process, starting with going to the Coachella Valley to do research as the kind of genesis of the project. But really, it started in 2015, and it's actually when I met you, JJ. We were in a residency together in Morocco, and the residency was just next to a date oasis that happened to be in harvest season. And at the residency, we were encouraged, it was off grid, and we were encouraged to be minimal in the technology and mindful of the energy we were using. So I brought a Bolex, and I was really interested in hand processing and looking for regional developers and plants that would work really well. And the date worked beautifully. It has the phenols and the materials. And so in working with the kind of discards from the harvest and hand processing, I kind of became fascinated with the palm tree and sort of fell in love with the palm tree and, observed people's relationship to it. And that was really the kind of beginnings of this, was tracing the palm tree and then learning of all of the medjool palms that had been imported to the Coachella Valley.
Yeah. I remember that there was this sort of like element of lineage and where do the dates go, where do they come from, and all this. And so like to me, watching the film now and seeing its originary kind of narrative that you just described, and all the way down to Coachella, like I see that there's like the way that the film relates with not just the dates, the palm trees, the dates, and also like grapes and all of the other images of like geography, but also ecology and all of this. Like I see that there's like so many gestures that happen in the film, and that it's like not just a representation of these dynamics, but it's also like it's almost like it's like an in situ being with, and I think it manifests in like the ways that you're like using like hand processing and using those same elements that you're filming, using them in the way that the film is being kind of like conjured in a way, if that makes sense. And so that's one side of it, and then the other would be like I also understand that this film has a collaborative component, so with those elements, but also with the people that are part of the what we would traditionally call production. You know that it's kind of like a choral film in this sense, not just the people in the film, but also, like I said, everything else, the geography, the ecology. And I wonder if there's any way that we can elaborate on how these kind of like multimodal dynamics come to be, especially talking about, like all the time and keeping that consistency, even though there's different film stocks, there's different ways of approaching these things. Like, it's not really like that good of a question in the sense that it's like pinpointed, no? But it's, how do we talk about making films in this way, I suppose, like, especially with this in relation to like what we just witnessed, no?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of like everything is everything, or things are quite
One
interrelated.
second, I'll hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yeah.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, it is, in some ways, everything is enmeshed. So everything kind of has this interrelated way of becoming. And I think in some ways, because this film emerged from hand processing with the date, because it emerged from the relationship, one thing that gets talked about, I think, in hand processing or ecological processing is collaboration, which is also a bit contested because collaboration also has to have consent in a relationship. And when you're working with plants and ecology, how do you know that that is happening? And so a word that has come up quite a bit that I've been thinking about is a kind of correspondence. So you're in relationship and responding. And I think this whole film is a kind of network of correspondence. And what happened when we went to the Coachella Valley, I'd had a friend tell me that there's this whole, like these medjool farms, and it just so happened that I have family that lives there, and they're the golfers, the folks who live on the golf course. It's my stepfather's aunt and uncle. And so I called them up, and they welcomed me to stay with them on the golf course in this kind of retirement community. And so that became a relationship that was really much a part of the film and the leisure aspect. And then I went to the Date Museum, and I met Daniela, who's a big voice in the film, and became also a collaborator because she was so interested in filmmaking. And she's the one who said, you have to meet my grandmother who runs this store, and our family friends have this date farm. So almost every single person who is in the film came from a relationship that pre-existed and was part of this correspondence, other than the geologist who we kind of emailed every seismic geologist, earthquake geologist whose email we could get our hands on, looking for someone who was working the fault line. And then Aaron at the Mulkey Museum, that was someone we heard about the Mulkey Museum and Catherine Siva-Sabel's work and writing about the palm tree and the garden. So it was really this kind of it was this kind of snowball method of encountering people and people leading us to other places, and then also really just paying attention as we were, moving from one place to the next. Things would happen, and so we would kind of reorient. And so it was a very there were a lot of tributaries we were following.
This conversation around correspondence and maybe even travelogue that is part of of the film, and I think that is, at least for me, it's becoming like a very relevant way of kind of like making this type of films in today's landscape, because of like this collaborative component that you're describing, and with like the difficulties that it now of just making a film like of this nature, like length and just like consistency. I mean, ultimately, like changing a little bit the page. And I feel like this film also has like this, like operates in a region where like it's so regional whispers of sorts. Like there's so much going on, while it's all also very tender and very like colloquial, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Which I also think that goes back to like this question of like time and patience and relationships and all this. And so not so much a question, but also like addressing this thing about you referred to like talking to all these people. I remember that maybe a few months ago when I first watched the film, it became clear to me that like some things maybe had been going back to this notion of correspondence. That some things might have been filmed by other people while you weren't there. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I kind of get the sense that it was this way, and so the correspondence not just in the form of the film, but also in the construction of the film, um, and maybe how that might have come to be, say, in the post production, and maybe how that could have like you know affected how the film was ultimately constructed and the conversations even post production, and and how like the relationships continue to operate. So I know that there's a lot of things in this comment, but feel free to take any of those. Like, but ultimately it's this notion of community that I think transcends some of the stuff that you were already talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. There's so many threads in there. I think, yeah, one of the things to say in the collaboration was this was a film, because I think the geography and the politics of the region are also obvious in some ways, but hard to read and hard to understand and very complicated and not always what they seem. And first entering into the landscape, I felt really unable to parse this on my own. Like I felt as though to see this or to understand this place, I was really interested in personal histories that people had led or lived and understood and had moved through them. And so I think that's part of the colloquial thing. But then also, I invited people to work on the project with me. My friend Charlene Bamboat, who's a filmmaker and just a really brilliant artist and thinker, was also someone who I invited to come into the space. And there's also a language barrier. Many of the people I worked with spoke Spanish fluently. I do not. And so I met Mireia Martinez at a film festival, actually. And she's also brilliant and was making a film about small towns in California and grew up between California and Mexico. And in her spare time, translates poetry between English and Spanish. And so there was just such a great like energy and how she was thinking and what was happening with the film. And so I invited her to kind of come on as a production coordinator. And then as soon as we started working together, it became so clear that she was also involved in this writing and interpreting, that it wasn't just in being an interviewer or a translator, that she was also directing the way the conversations would go. And one thing I love about working with Mireia is that she is so casual in the way she asks questions in these kind of in situ interviews. And she's so patient and calm. And there would be these long stretches of silence. And then she would ask a question that would occur in that moment. And it was just like, I loved the rhythm of the time we would spend with people and the way that these interviews would unfold. And that became such a part of the I don't know, ethos of the feeling of the rhythm of the film. And it really also informed how we edited the film in the end. And another thing that happened is that COVID interrupted the two huge shoots that were going to happen. One with the geologist and another shoot with Aaron were scheduled for March 13th, 2020. And so the whole film, those didn't happen, obviously. And everything was put on pause for about 2 years. And so Mireia went with Alicia Tejpal, who's also a filmmaker and cinematographer who had worked with us in the field as kind of an AC during the time. So they went and did shoots on their own, and some of that made it into the film. And it's, I mean, as you pointed out, JJ, there's like different film stocks. I'm shooting with 2 different cameras. Like there's not necessarily a uniform aesthetic in the way that it's shot. And Alicia, as a cinematographer, has like a very different sensibility. She's very much like, she likes to shoot further and she's very locked off, and there's a kind of symmetry. And I like that style. And I didn't want to tell her to shoot as I was shooting. So I think I really like the way in which the different artists and collaborators and people would bring their own way of interpreting and thinking. And I think that just kind of, I don't know, I think it's, I mean, it makes it complicated to bring together, but it also creates the kind of dynamic, like more of a topography in terms of the film instead of something that is, you know, kind of, yeah, it gives it more texture, I think.
Yeah, I really love how that is weaved in the film. It does feel like a chorus of sorts. I want to leave enough space for people to ask questions here in the audience. So there's a microphone running around if anybody is interested in asking a question. Here we go. Yeah.
So I have hearing problems. I did not hear most of the film. Do you need closed caption everywhere for every moment? Because it's very confusing as a film anyhow, without being able to read what people are saying. It's just impossible to follow.
Yeah, thanks for your comment. I would like to get open captions made, and there are captions that actually, there is a captioned version of the film. There are closed captions, but I don't think this screening was a caption screening.
Yeah.
But I do think accessibility is an important part of it, and I'm sorry that I don't have open captions for this film.
Does anybody else have a question for Terra? Comment, question? No?
I wondered about two things. First, the funding. How do you fund a film like this, and how do you find people to support you monetarily? And second, the pacing of the film was interesting to me. It was a slow pace, kind of like the way dates grow, I thought. Each scene started, well, not every scene this way, but there would be a close-up with a lot of detail and no context, and it would slowly reveal itself. For example, the palm tree on its side dangling, and you realized a few moments later that it was a machine that had cut it down and was moving. The whole film had this patience and sense of letting things evolve and be discovered. And I wondered if that was intentional and if you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really lovely observation. I think in the way that I shoot often, I am interested in texture, and I'm interested in what happens when certain context is removed and you have to try and figure out what is happening. So I notice, I don't know if it was conscious at first, but it's a strategy that I use often when I'm filming and even in editing, that I might show something that is kind of surreal, the angle, or you don't quite understand how, like the floating palm is a beautiful example. You don't understand how that might be happening. And I think it's a way also to invite curiosity from the viewer to participate in putting together this space and putting together the scene themselves. And then in terms of the rhythm, I think we were also really attentive to the rhythm of the shooting. The Bolex camera, which I shot a lot of the film on, you can only shoot 28 seconds at a time. And so often the length of the shot is 28 seconds. And some people call that the breadth of the Bolex. And I think that's a really nice thing to lean into. And I think sometimes with a longer shot, you're waiting for something to happen. You don't quite know what's going to evolve. And so there's a way that you're engaging with chance. And so that was the kind of strategies in filming. And then the editor, Kaya Sirila, and I worked closely together. And I think we were taking a lot of those cues and the pacing from what was filmed. And because film is expensive, we didn't have a lot of footage, right? And so you're deliberate in what you're shooting. And then in the edit, I think maybe you want to use a lot of that footage also because of I don't want to say it's precious. We're trying not to be precious with the footage, but there's an intentionality in often what's shot. And of course, some things don't work and you have to let them go entirely. But I think that accounts for part of the pacing. And then the funding came through the Canada Council for the Arts. So I'm a Canadian, and we have a federal funding body, and it's a peer-reviewed process. So I wrote an application for the film, and in two parts. So the initial funding came through research and creation, and so I had already kind of met some of the people and done audio interviews and filmed a little bit, and that sample was used to generate the funding, and then provincial funding, so government funding, and then also Echo Park Film Center, which is an amazing space that was started in Los Angeles and supports independent film. They were a really wonderful supporter, and Media City Film Festival also supported the film.
Thank you. Yeah, another question. Yeah, okay.
I had one more question about the sound. I really appreciated that you didn't put background music in. And that must have been a conscious choice. It was all diegetic sound. Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah, thank you. I worked with a really amazing sound designer, Richie Carey, and that was another collaboration that was folded into the film. We started working on the film together way before post-production, when I was still in the production process. And initially there was a musician I really wanted to work with. She has this Jessica Moss, and she wrote this piece called Entanglement, and it's really beautiful and it fits really well with the thematics of the film. But when we tried to put music in, it felt like it overpowered. And I think working with Richie is really also centers field recordings a lot, and using sound as a way to evoke the place and also push beyond the frame, point us in ways to things that we can't see, to understand what's happening below the frame, or even like below the surface of what we can perceive as humans. And so I think having all of that sound, for the most part, from the area was a way to really enrich the kind of ecological thematics and really hopefully give a sense of presence to the space. And I think there's also a lot of music that is diegetic that happens in the film. And so that gave us some leeway to also fold that in and really play with it. So one thing I love about working with Richie too is after you do the initial pass is he starts to take textures from maybe a dance scene, the bells that you see in the night scene with the dancing, and those bells are actually folded in much earlier in the film. So you get these kind of more subtle pieces of the diegetic music that feel like ambience that come from these different aspects of the piece. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah. Do we have any last lingering questions for Terra? Cool. Well, Terra, thank you so much for being here, sharing the film. Lovely seeing you again. Yeah.
Thanks, JJ. It's great to see you, and thanks for watching the film and programming it. And yeah, have a great festival.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.